that's going to get themselves together, you know. We're not for the whole lot of people sitting around in the big drug den, sitting around complaining.
Jimi Hendrix changed the sound of rock and roll forever. By the age of 27, he had become one of the most celebrated musicians on earth, a man whose guitar playing felt almost supernatural. But just when his career was about to reach another level, he passed away under extremely tragic circumstances. Behind the fame was a powerful manager with a dark reputation, a man surrounded by whispers of missing money, intimidation, and deals that never quite added up. Hendrix had begun to pull away, asking questions no one wanted answered. And then, before he could escape, he was gone. Years later, someone from inside Hendrix's inner circle emerged with a chilling claim. He alleged that before his own death, Jimi Hendrix's manager had privately confessed that Hendrix's tragic end was no accident, and revealed what really happened that night. The accusation would send shockwaves through the music world and reopen decades of disturbing questions surrounding Hendrix's death. The legend of Jimi Hendrix. In rock and roll history, Jimi Hendrix is widely regarded as one of the most respected and influential guitarists. He did not just play the instrument, he reinvented it, and the sound that came out of his amplifiers changed music forever. But behind the pyrotechnics and the screaming crowds, Jimi Hendrix was a deeply troubled man. His rise to fame had been lightning fast, and the cracks in his foundation were showing long before the world noticed. The man who managed him knew everything, and what happened between the both of them will leave you shocked. Jimi Hendrix was born on November 27, 1942, in Seattle, Washington, but the early years were marked by instability. His parents divorced when he was 9 years old, and both of them struggled with alcoholism. His mother died when Jimi was just 16, and this loss sent him spiraling even deeper into anger and confusion. His home was fractured, and the fractures went deeper than most people knew. 4 of his siblings were either taken away or given away by the state. The family had too many mouths to feed and not enough money to feed them. Jimi stayed, but he stayed alone. Neglect was a constant presence, and some biographers have suggested that maltreatment was as well. The boy, who would one day stand in front of hundreds of thousands of people at Woodstock, spent his childhood feeling invisible. His first guitar was not a guitar at all. At 14 years old, he found a broken broomstick that another boy had thrown away. It had one string, stretched across a piece of wood, but Jimi managed to play tunes on it anyway. He held it upside down because he was left-handed, and that was the only way it felt right. That orientation would become his signature. When he finally bought his first real guitar, a proper acoustic for $5 from a friend of his father, he flipped it over and played it upside down. His first electric guitar was a white Supro Ozark, purchased by his father Al, who worked odd jobs to afford it. Jimi had no formal training. He could not read or write music notation. He learned by watching Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley perform on television, studying their fingers and copying their movements. He finished middle school but dropped out of Garfield High School. When reporters later asked about his education, he claimed he had been thrown out for being rude to a teacher. The truth was more complicated. He was not rude, he was bored. The classroom could not hold his attention because his mind was always somewhere else, chasing sounds that no one else could hear. After 2 arrests for stealing cars, he was given a choice in May of 1961. He could go to prison, or he could join the Army. He chose the Army. He was stationed at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, where his officers quickly noticed that he was not cut out for military life. He was often caught sleeping on duty. One report noted that his mind apparently could not function while performing duties and thinking about his guitar. While in the Army, he met a bassist named Billy Cox. The two of them bonded over their shared love of music, and they would later form a band together called the King Casuals. Years later, Cox would become a member of the Band of Gypsies, one of the most important groups of Hendrix's career. The Army gave Jimi an honorable discharge on May 31, 1962. He later claimed that he had broken his ankle on his 26th parachute jump. That may have been true, or it may have been a story. With Jimi, it was often hard to tell the difference. The break that changed everything came in 1966. A woman named Linda Keith, who was the girlfriend of Rolling Stones guitarist Keith Richards, heard Hendrix playing at a club called Café Wah in New York City. She was stunned by what she saw. She introduced him to Chas Chandler, the bassist for The Animals. Chandler heard something special in Jimi and brought him to London. He asked Jimi to write a rock version of an old folk song called Hey Joe, and the Jimi Hendrix Experience was born. Chandler would become Jimi's creative partner and would help him shape his sound and his image. But Chandler was not alone. He had a partner named Michael Jeffrey. Jeffrey opened the legendary Club A-Go-Go with his partner, Ray Graham. The legendary band, The Animals, served as the club's house band, and through them, Jeffrey found his way into music management. But he soon developed a shadowy reputation. He had previously been associated with Don Arden, a notorious British manager known for using intimidation and violence. There were also persistent rumors linking Jeffrey to British intelligence and elements of European organized crime. When Chas Chandler decided to manage Hendrix, Jeffrey claimed that Chandler was still under contract and demanded a percentage. This forced Chandler to take Jeffrey on as co-manager. Jeffrey would handle business and finance, while Chandler would handle creative production. But the arrangement was uneasy from the very start. Behind the scenes, Jeffrey would begin making deals that would ultimately destroy everything. He had a dark reputation, and his involvement in Jimi's career would prove to be both a blessing and a curse. The decline. No one saw coming. For 2 years, Jimi Hendrix had been everywhere. He played constantly, toured endlessly, and gave everything he had to every performance. The world could not get enough of him, and he could not say no. But the machine that had made him famous was also grinding him down. The same managers and promoters who had lifted him up were now squeezing him dry. The cracks in his career appeared slowly at first, then all at once. And by the time anyone realized how bad things had gotten, it was too late. The first sign of trouble came during the recording of Axis, Bold as Love, the band's second album. Hendrix lost the master tape of Side 1 in the back of a London taxi. The tape contained the finished mixes of several songs, and without it, weeks of work would be lost. He, Chas Chandler, and engineer Eddie Kramer had to remix the entire side from scratch in a single night. The pressure was immense, and the incident revealed how fragile Jimi's creative process had become. The bigger blow came in 1968, during the sessions for Electric Ladyland. Chandler, who had discovered Jimi and brought him to London, suddenly quit as both producer and co-manager. He was burned out, tired of the non-stop work and the constant battles with Jeffrey over money and control. Jeffrey bought out Chandler's share, tightening his grip on Hendrix's career. The creative partnership that had produced some of Hendrix's biggest hits was over. From that point on, Jeffrey was in charge. The band began to crumble. Noel Redding, the bassist, left the Experience that same year. He was dissatisfied with Jeffrey's financial dealings and felt that he was being treated unfairly. The official breakup came in mid-1969. Hendrix was exhausted after 2 years of non-stop work, and Redding and drummer Mitch Mitchell were suspicious of Jeffrey's financial dealings. The Experience was over, and a new chapter was about to begin. Hendrix formed a short-lived hard funk trio called the Band of Gypsies, featuring bassist Billy Cox and drummer Buddy Miles. The music was different from what he had done before. It was raw and groove-driven. But Jeffrey did not like the direction. Buddy Miles later claimed that Jeffrey deliberately undermined their performance at Madison Square Garden by giving Hendrix a mind-altering substance. Behind the scenes, the pressures of fame were taking a toll that no one could see. Jimi was constantly exhausted. The relentless touring and recording schedule left him with no time to rest. In the week before his death, he was suffering from severe exhaustion and a chronic lack of sleep, compounded by a persistent flu-like illness. His body was giving out, but the machine kept demanding more. He also battled addiction. Alcohol and illicit substances were a regular part of his life, and the habits only worsened as the stress increased. His mental health was fragile. He suffered from insecurities about his personal relationships and a deep disillusionment with the music industry. The man who had once said that music was his religion now felt like a prisoner of his own success. His romantic life was no less turbulent. His relationships were unstable, and the emotional chaos bled into his work. He could not find peace at home any more than he could find it on the road. Through it all, Jeffrey continued to manage his career with an iron fist. But Jimi was beginning to suspect that his manager was not acting in his best interest. He had heard whispers about missing money, about contracts that favored Jeffrey over the band, and Jimi wanted out. The suspicion Hendrix had about his manager. By the summer of 1970, Jimi Hendrix had given everything to his music. He had poured his soul into every note, every performance, and every late night in the studio. But when he looked at his bank account, there was almost nothing there. The man who had sold out arenas around the world could not account for where his money had gone. The suspicion began to grow, quietly at first, then louder. Michael Jeffrey, his trusted manager, was not just taking a cut, he was taking everything. The pattern had been set years before Hendrix ever entered the picture. When the original Animals split up in 1966, there were only £500 left in their band account. The group had been successful. They had hits and tours and all the trappings of fame. Yet the money had vanished. Jeffrey had been their manager too. The same thing was happening to Jimi, only on a much larger scale. Biographers have since alleged that Jeffrey siphoned off much of Hendrix's income and channeled it into offshore bank accounts. The money was not lost. It was hidden. Noel Redding, the experienced bassist, once walked into a room where Jeffrey was packing briefcases full of the band's cash. When Redding asked where the money was going, he was told to leave. The question was not answered. The suspicion was not addressed. The money simply disappeared. The most damning piece of evidence came from a contract that Hendrix signed with Jeffrey in 1966. The terms were so one-sided that they made legal history. Jeffrey owned the copyrights to all the music. Not a share, not a percentage. All of it. The songs that Jimi had written, the solos that he had bled over, the albums that had changed the course of rock and roll, they all belonged to Jeffrey. The arrangement was legal, but it was also a trap. Hendrix could not leave his manager without losing everything he had created. Jeffrey also complicated Jimi's life by proposing investments in outside businesses. He wanted Hendrix to put money into clubs and recording studios, ventures that pulled focus from music and tied him further to Jeffrey's web. He was also instrumental behind the muddled film Rainbow Bridge, a project that distracted Hendrix from recording and generated more confusion than profit. Every path that Jimi tried to take seemed to lead back to Jeffrey's pockets. Then there was the insurance policy. According to a memoir published in 2009 by a former assistant named Tappy Wright, Jeffrey allegedly took out a $2 million life insurance policy on Jimi Hendrix. The policy was worth approximately £1.2 million at the time. The beneficiary was not Hendrix's family. It was not a charity or a trust fund. The sole beneficiary was Michael Jeffrey. The implications of that policy are chilling. If Hendrix died of natural causes or in an accident, Jeffrey would collect $2 million. If Hendrix decided to leave Jeffrey and break their contract, Jeffrey would lose everything: the management fees, the future earnings, and the control over the music. If Hendrix died under intentional circumstances, the policy would be void, and Jeffrey would receive nothing. The financial incentive was clear. Jeffrey allegedly needed Hendrix to die in a way that looked like an accident. The memoir has been disputed by some sources, and Jeffrey himself died before he could be questioned about it. But the document exists. The policy was real, and the questions that it raises have never been fully answered. Jimi Hendrix was not naive. He knew that something was wrong. He had begun to ask questions about his finances and began to push back against Jeffrey's control. In fact, he had begun talking about finding new management. The conversations were tentative at first, but they were becoming more frequent. Jimi wanted out. He wanted to own his music and control his career and live his life without a handler who treated him like an asset. Sadly, he never got the chance to break free. In September of 1970, the man who had changed music forever was gone. The world called it an accident, but there were too many loose ends and too many unanswered questions, and at the center of it all allegedly stood Michael Jeffrey. The tragic death of Jimi Hendrix. The heartbreaking end of Jimi Hendrix's life came on a Friday, September 18, 1970. Started like any other day in London, gray and damp, with the kind of chill that settles into the bones and refuses to leave. But for the millions of fans who would soon hear the news, that Friday would become a before and after. Jimi Hendrix was 27 years old when he died, a number that would later take on a grim significance after other rock stars died at the same age. He was found in a basement flat at the Samarkand Hotel, a modest building at 22 Lansdowne Crescent in Notting Hill. The room was small and cluttered, a far cry from the grand stages where he had once commanded the attention of hundreds of thousands. 2 nights before his death, Jimi had played his final public performance. On September 16th, he sat in with Eric Burdon's band War at Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club. The club was intimate, nothing like the festivals and arenas he was used to. He played guitar that night, and those who were there said he sounded like himself, still brilliant, still searching for new sounds. No one in the audience knew they were witnessing history. No one knew that this was the last time Jimi Hendrix would ever play his guitar for a crowd. The day after that performance, September 17th, Jimi bought writing paper and composed what are believed to be his final lyrics. The words have never been fully released, but fragments suggest a man who was tired, disillusioned, and longing for something he could not name. Later that evening, around 10 o'clock, he was at a friend's apartment with his girlfriend, Monica Dannemann. The friend was Philip Harvey, and the evening that had started suddenly turned sour when Dannemann became jealous of Hendrix's attention to other women. She yelled at him, calling him a terrible name, and stormed out. Jimi followed her. They argued for 30 minutes on the street, 2 people tearing at each other in the dark. The timeline of what happened next has never been fully resolved. Dannemann later claimed that Hendrix took 9 of her prescribed sleeping medications at 11 o'clock on the morning of September 18th. This was 18 times the recommended dosage, an amount that would have incapacitated a man twice his size. But here is where the story becomes strange. According to Dannemann's account, the ambulance was not called until 11:27 the following morning, more than 24 hours later. That delay has remained one of the most questioned parts of the story. When emergency responders finally arrived, they found Hendrix lying on his back in the flat. The door was open, and the cooking gas fire was on. There is no record of who actually called the ambulance. The call was placed, but the name of the person who made it has never been confirmed. He was taken to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, where doctors worked on him for more than an hour. He was finally pronounced dead at 12:45 in the afternoon. The post-mortem examination determined that he had died of asphyxia due to aspiration of vomit, which was contributed to by intoxication. In simpler terms, he was in a condition where his body could not effectively protect his breathing. The coroner returned an open verdict, which meant that there was insufficient evidence to determine whether the death was an accident or something else entirely. The verdict left the door open for questions that have never been fully answered. Jimi Hendrix was buried on October 1, 1970, at Greenwood Cemetery in Renton, Washington, a suburb of Seattle. The service was private, attended by family and close friends. The public mourned from a distance, gathering outside the gates, laying flowers and lighting candles. The legend was gone, but the questions about how he died would not rest. In 1992, an ex-girlfriend named Kathy Etchingham asked Scotland Yard to reopen the case. Her request was based on inconsistencies in Dannemann's account and new evidence that had come to light. A formal inquiry was conducted in 1993, but it proved inconclusive, and the doubts have never been fully resolved. For decades, the world accepted that Jimi Hendrix had died due to an illicit substance-related accident. But a man named James Tappy Wright, who had worked as a roadie for Hendrix and later as an assistant to Michael Jeffrey, claimed to know something different. He said that Jeffrey had confessed the truth to him years later, and that confession, if true, would change everything. The shocking confession that changed everything. For nearly 40 years, the world believed that the tragic death of Jimi Hendrix had been an accident. The coroner's open verdict left room for doubt, but most people accepted that the brilliant young guitarist had simply gone too far. It was a tragic end, but a familiar one. Rock stars were dying young in those years, and Hendrix was just another name on a growing list. But then, in 2009, a man named James Tappy Wright published a memoir that blew the whole story apart. Wright had been a roadie for the Animals and a close associate of Hendrix's inner circle. He alleged that Michael Jeffrey, Hendrix's manager, had confessed to the murder of Jimi Hendrix before he died. The confession allegedly took place in 1971, just 1 year after Hendrix died. Jeffrey was drunk in his London apartment, and Wright was there. According to the memoir, Jeffrey admitted that he had lied about being out of town on the night of Hendrix's death. He said that he was actually in London, and that he and some old friends had gone to Monica Dannemann's hotel room. Wright claimed that they had found Hendrix already unconscious from the sleeping medication he had taken earlier. But instead of calling an ambulance, the memoir alleged that Jeffrey and his friends stuffed a handful of illicit substances into Hendrix's mouth. Then they poured several bottles of red wine into his mouth. According to the shocking memoir, the motive was money. Jeffrey allegedly told Wright that Hendrix was worth much more to him dead than alive. The guitarist had been planning to leave him, to break their contract and find new management. If Jeffrey lost Hendrix, he would lose everything. He would lose the management fees, the future earnings, and the control over the music. The $2 million insurance policy that Jeffrey had allegedly taken out on Hendrix's life was also mentioned. If Hendrix died of natural causes or an accident, Jeffrey would collect the payout. If Hendrix fired him, Jeffrey got nothing. The memoir was explosive, but it was also controversial. Critics pointed out that Wright had waited nearly 40 years to share this story. Why had he not come forward sooner? Why had he kept the confession a secret, while Jeffrey was still alive to deny it? Wright explained that he had been afraid. Jeffrey was a powerful man with dangerous connections. He had been associated with organized crime figures and had a reputation for violence. Wright feared for his life. Only after Jeffrey was dead, and decades had passed, did he feel safe enough to speak. Jeffrey himself had died in 1973, just 2 years after the alleged confession. He was aboard an Iberia Airlines DC-9 that collided with another aircraft over Nantes, France. He was only 39 years old, 8 days shy of his 40th birthday. His death was ruled an accident, but the timing was strange. Conspiracy theories have swirled around his death ever since, though no evidence has ever emerged to suggest foul play. The weight of Wright's allegations gave new significance to a detail that had been overlooked for years. The surgeon who had tried to revive Hendrix, a doctor named John Bannister, came forward in 1992 with a statement that conflicted with the official autopsy report. Bannister said that he recalled a significant amount of fluid found in Hendrix's airway and lungs. Bannister also noted that there was relatively little alcohol detected in the bloodstream compared to what might be expected. That discrepancy is crucial. If someone drinks wine, it goes into the stomach, not the area where it was found in Hendrix's body. Fluid in the lungs suggests foul play, just as Jeffrey allegedly confessed. The post-mortem report had ruled the cause of death as asphyxia due to aspiration of vomit, contributed to by intoxication. But Bannister's account suggests something different. He did not see vomit, he saw wine. This meant that the official story and the surgeon's memory do not line up. Not everyone believes Wright's account. Bob Levine, who was Hendrix's American manager at the time of his death, called the claim one giant lie. He pointed out that Wright had not been a close confidant of Jeffrey's and that his motives for writing the memoir were financial. The book sold copies because it promised a scandal, and Levine believed that Wright had invented the story to make money. There are other inconsistencies. Wright claimed that Jeffrey confessed in 1971, but Jeffrey was still very much alive and in control of Hendrix's estate at that time. Why would he admit such a scandalous secret to a roadie, someone who was not a lawyer or a priest or a close friend? The confession, if it happened, was remarkably reckless for a man who had been described as cold and calculating. Still, the physical evidence remains troubling. Dr. Bannister had no reason to lie. He was a respected surgeon, and his account was consistent over multiple interviews. The timing of the ambulance call also raises questions. Danneman claimed that Hendrix became unconscious at 11 in the morning, but the ambulance was not called until several hours later. That is a long time to leave someone unconscious. What was happening in that hotel room during those missing hours? The case has never been reopened. Scotland Yard conducted an inquiry in 1993 at the request of Hendrix's former girlfriend, Kathy Etchingham, but the investigation proved inconclusive. The evidence was too old, and the witnesses too few. Jeffrey was already dead and could not be questioned. The official verdict remains an open verdict, a legal acknowledgement that the full circumstances of Hendrix's death are not known. For fans who have loved Jimi Hendrix's music for decades, the allegations are painful to consider. The idea that their hero may have died under such circumstances is almost too dark to accept. But the questions will not go away. We may never know the full truth because the key players are all dead. Jeffrey died in a plane crash. Danneman died under tragic circumstances in 1996. Hendrix himself has been gone for more than 50 years. All that remains are the memories of those who were there and the documents that survived them. Tappy Wright's memoir is not proof. It is testimony, and testimony can be wrong. But it is also the closest thing to a confession that the world will ever have. And it suggests that the death of Jimi Hendrix was not a tragedy of his own making. It may have been a crime. Do you believe the shocking claims made by James Wright? Tell us your thoughts in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe to our channel for more updates.